Difficulty in video games has always been a hot topic for debate, I think largely because it's such a subjective point that is entirely dependent on the person playing the game. The greatest games will have depth to their mechanics, and a high skill ceiling for their most dedicated players to improve. The truth is that not everyone has a few hundred hours to sink into mastering a game's mechanics, and it's not always what people are looking for. Some people just want a fun experience, something to play through and enjoy the ride, without sweating too hard or having to become so frustrated that they put the game down. Game developers usually balance this experience through the use of difficulty levels. If you want to breeze through a campaign, you can set it to easy, but if you want the most a game has to offer, you can set it to the hardest difficulty available. Sometimes developers will go overboard with this, but I think it is generally a good compromise to have for a wider audience. And that got me thinking, how exactly should developers balance the difficulty for a cooperative game, and is it possible to have a cooperative game with a fixed difficulty? I've always been a very big fan of games with a fixed difficulty. Dark Souls is the first series to come to mind. It's a risk on the developer's part for sure, since the game can deny its audience content based on how good they are, and with some steep walls to overcome, some people might get turned away for good. But when it comes to themes, atmosphere, and accomplishments, the Souls series really does sit on top. If the game had an easy mode that allowed players to just blast through it, it would be a much harder sell on the grimdark mood that the game carries throughout, and players would lose the experience of becoming powerful as the game progresses, an experience they earn themselves, not through a powerful weapon or item, but through their own volition. While I love the Souls games, and I certainly do not want an easy mode in any From Software game, I've also come to realize that the reason a fixed difficulty works so well in the Souls series is because of how simple the game's mechanics are. Really, all you have to do is dodge and hit. There's a few other variables that can be thrown in there, but that's really what it comes down to. Sekiro changed this formula slightly, emphasizing a parry over a dodge, but for the most part the game is still just as simple. Could a game with more mechanics and more depth really get away with that? Let's take a look at everyone's game of the year in 2020, for example, Doom Eternal. You got a dash, weapon mods for every gun, a meat hook that makes you Spider-Man, weak points on enemies, staggers, a chainsaw, a flamethrower, grenades, a lot of stuff to take into account. Compared to other shooters and even its predecessor Doom 2016, the game has a lot to take in, and because of this there's different things that the player has to master before they can play on the hardest difficulty. Some players might be great at aiming but not quite understand the movement, some might not chainsaw enough and find themselves always out of ammo, and others might not know the weaknesses of each demon, which puts them at a disadvantage. The game has more layers than an onion.
I'm a goddamn onion, Mason.
And if the game was set to a permanent nightmare mode without any way to change it, I think it would be overwhelming to the player. This is where I think difficulties are a good thing. They can ease the player into learning the game's mechanics, and if an individual feels they want more of a challenge, they can up the difficulty from there. Which brings me to the main topic of the video, difficulty in co-op games. Designing an experience for a single player is one thing, but what about for four? Lately, cooperative games have seen a resurgence in the past year. I've been playing a lot of Left 4 Dead and Phasmophobia myself with my friends. Similar to Doom, all of them have some way of altering the challenge. So, how would a developer design a game's difficulty with the expectation that 4 people are going to play it? Well, I think that instead of designing the difficulty based on how skilled the player is at the game, they design the difficulty around how well the 4 people can work together. Left 4 Dead does this through the use of Special Infected. If you go through a level alone and don't stick together, a hunter or smoker can easily incapacitate you, so the game forces you to rely on your teammates for help. On top of that, on harder difficulties, the damage from friendly fire is increased, so you really need to be mindful that you're not shooting at your teammates. Other games like Castle Crashers scale the number of enemies on screen to the number of people playing, so that if one player goes down it could quickly get overwhelming. Phasmophobia causes the ghost to be more aggressive, so your team needs to coordinate their efforts to spend as little time searching for clues as possible. These games don't have nearly as deep of a combat system as something like Eternal, but the rewarding part of the game comes from the satisfaction of successful teamwork. Overall, I like having difficulty in cooperative games. I think it allows players to choose what kind of experience they want to have. Do they want to sweat and push themselves to their limits, or do they want to sit back and talk about life while having something to play in the background? In the case of Vermintide 2, for me and my friends it was the latter. The game is basically a Left 4 Dead clone in the Warhammer universe. It's a lot of fun, but the combat is much more in-depth. We play on what was essentially the normal difficulty of the game, and whenever we tried to increase it, we couldn't make it past the first 10 minutes of a level. For us, we wanted to mess around, make fun of each other, and kill some rats. It's awesome that there's something for the hardcore audience, and I think there always should be, but for us the higher difficulty required a level of coordination that we just didn't have, so the easier difficulty was welcome. So, can a co-op game benefit from a fixed difficulty? I'm sure there are plenty of cases where they can, and some cases where they kind of have to. Puzzle games like Portal immediately come to mind. It adds a level of legitimacy to your accomplishments, but I think that skill gaps between multiple people might be a little too varied to force players into a single difficulty level. For single-player games, I generally like having a fixed difficulty, but for co-op games, the option to make it easier or harder on who I'm playing with is welcome. If Vermintide didn't give us the option, I think the game would suffer from it. But that's just my opinion. Let me know your take in the comments, consider liking the video and subscribing, and if you're interested, follow me on Twitch. I stream a variety of games, and co-op nights are pretty common with me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.